Thank you, Gaurav. Really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Confluence 2020. Hope you've been enjoying the conference over the last few days. Asia will account for more than half the global economy by 2040. What opportunities and risks lie ahead as the Asian century unfolds? Today, we will talk about what makes Asia unique and how global companies can leverage Asia, the global gateway to innovation, technology, and markets. Next slide. Historian and diplomat Joseph Nye, in a recent TED talk, showed us how power is shifting from the west to the east over the last 200 years. When we talk about power transition, we often talk about the rise of Asia, but it really should be called the recovery or return of Asia. If you looked at the world in 1800, you would find that more than half the world's people lived in Asia and they made more than half the world's economy. Now fast forward to 1900 and more than half the world's people still live in Asia, but they are now making only fifth of the world's production. What happened? The Industrial Revolution, which meant Europe and America became the dominant centers of the world. We are seeing that what we are seeing in the 21st century, though, is Asia is gradually returning to being more than half the world's population and more than half the world's economy. And how did this happen? Today, Asia is 5 billion people, two-thirds of the world's mega cities, one-third of the global economy, two-thirds of the global economic growth, 200 of the Fortune 500 companies, 6 of the 10 largest banks, 5 nuclear powers, massive technological innovation, and home to some of the top-ranked universities. Asia is also the world's most ethnically, linguistically, and culturally diverse region of the planet. People in Asia are used to dealing with stresses, randomness, volatility, and uncertainty they bring. Their environment requires them to be anti-fragile and thrive in that environment. So how are people in Asia doing that? So today Asia is home to, whether you gauge by demographic, geography, economy, or any other metric, Asia is already the present, and it will certainly be the future. It is for this reason that the companies cannot afford to get Asia wrong, be it for talent, for resources, for innovation, and for markets. By 2040, the world's GDP will be 50% in Asia and 50% the rest of the world. My colleague Amita will now take us through some of the examples and resiliency of Asia and how Asia has been able to get to this point. Over to you, Amita.
Thank you, Nilesh. As you correctly mentioned, Asia is the future. It is also, however, a very interesting continent, not only with the largest population in the world, but also highly diverse and huge income disparity. Also, limited resources because most of the countries in this continent are developing countries. With such diversity disparities, it's also very interesting to note that the top 3 countries with the highest IQ on average happen to be Asian. I think that's very evident with the number of technology CEOs for global companies of Asian origin that we are seeing these days. And if by any means we were to say that technology is going to determine the next superpower in the world, it is worth noting that India and China together account for more than 5 million software engineers. That is absolutely incredible. When companies are looking at building solutions for this continent or countries in this continent, what they need to remember is that they need to deal with heterogeneity, simplicity, and still build elegant solutions. I'd like to walk you through some examples. Aadhaar. Who doesn't know Aadhaar? It's the world's largest biometric identification system. And as the World Bank says, digital ID is going to be a game changer and a force multiplier in the global push towards poverty alleviation, access to finance, and shared prosperity. We know more than half of the world's population is in the developing world. Without a legal identity, these people cannot avail social benefits. Corruption is going to be rampant. That's what Aadhaar solved for. Before Aadhaar was launched, a very small percentage of the Indian population, about 4%, had any kind of unique identification. But ever since Aadhaar has come in place, there's more than 1 billion of this world population that has legal identity, biometric legal identity, It has saved 12 billion to the Indian government, and it has allowed the government to pass on 22.7 billion worth subsidies. The world is taking notice, and developing countries like Morocco, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Tunisia, etc., are following this example and trying to replicate these models. I'd like to walk you through another interesting example, UPI. 10 years ago, how many of us actually saw a fruit vendor or a chaatwala, which is like a roadside snack wala, actually using any kind of digital payment mode? That's because even though net banking existed, credit cards existed, it is either super hard or completely non-accessible by the masses here. And therefore, what UPI has solved for, it has solved for a huge financial inclusion. Companies across the world are taking note. It is very interesting to see how it's becoming a global model. In August 2019, Google wrote a letter to central bank when the Federal Reserve of US is trying to launch a program called Fed Now. Google said that this program and this platform has been really thought through and well designed. 19% of the India's GDP in 3 years' time was already flowing through UPI. They recommended the US Reserve and the central bank to look at it as a model if they are going to implement an interoperable banking system for faster payments in US. Countries like Singapore and UAE are also following this example. Another example, WeChat. It's the world's largest social powerhouse, if you ask me. The way it is integrated, the whole Chinese community inside and outside of China is incredible. It started by being a messaging app, a photo sharing app to build the social network in country like China, where other apps are censored usually. But now, if you have to hail a taxi, file a police complaint, call a doctor, or use your bank account, it's WeChat. More than 90% of the work that you do in China can be done alone by that app. It is widely said that WeChat is going to launch a digital ID, which actually could replace the state ID. That is really powerful. And as Professor Willie from Harvard Business School says, it's going to be a predictable evolution. We can talk all about data privacy, but there is no app in the world, according to me, which has integrated more than 1 billion people as well as some of these platforms and some of these apps have done. Let's look at another example, Raxul, a company which was formed about 10 years ago in Japan. It has completely democratized the way printing industry looks like in Japan. When Raxul was launched, the huge printing market in Japan was monopolized by big printing houses. What Raxul did was, through its sharing economy model, and it allowed the smaller printing houses to use their downtime. It shot up to become Forbes Startup of the Year. It also became a very, very interesting, successful case study for the Harvard Business Review, and the company has grown 120x within five years. That's because it's solving an unsolved problem and democratizing the way things work in the country. Well, we have seen some very, very interesting examples. Let's see what makes Asians different. It so happens that Asia is one of the world's, it witnesses one of the world's largest natural disasters and most frequently. And it so happens that Nilesh and I happen to have witnessed firsthand two of the biggest natural disasters. I was in Tokyo when the Great Tohoku earthquake hit, and Nilesh was in Mumbai when the 2005 floods hit Mumbai and ripped the city apart. But what we saw day in and day out was images like this. What you see on your top right is a Mumbai dabbawala who relentlessly, in spite of the floods, wants to serve the customers and make sure the lunch boxes reach them. What you saw and what you see in the right and the bottom is what I saw every day in Tokyo. I would see thousands of Japanese lined up to, in full discipline, calm environment to get necessities like milk and sugar. Children, people with 90 years of age above were climbing stairs to save power in the country because the nuclear reactors were completely devastated and TEPCO's power transmission was disrupted. If you see scenes like that, it teaches you lessons of life. And I think that is one of the biggest lessons in my life. Let's look at the recent COVID example. The Asian countries like Singapore, China, Japan were the first to hit. They had no other examples to follow. What did they do? They showed quick thinking, leaning on technology. They built hospitals with thousands of beds using AI and 5G in China. They used robots to disinfect hospitals, keep people apart. They used what was called draconian measures at that time, but has led to maintaining and reducing or managing the mortality. Asian countries have leaned on technology, leadership, discipline, and belief in science to manage the fatality. What are the results? As of July 16th, you can see the mortality per million is remarkably low in Asian countries as compared to the West. Well, civic discipline, testing, tracing, and treatment has worked for them at least relatively better than the rest of the world, and it sets an example about the resilience and the kind of character and the discipline these countries show in time of tragedy. I would like to pass on to my colleague Nilesh to see how can we leverage Asia.
Thanks, Amita. According to data from the World Bank and IMF, Asian countries, China, India, Japan, Indonesia, along with the US, are expected to be the top 5 countries in the world by the size of the GDP in 2024, relegating European economic powerhouses to lower ranks. Southeast Asia is another powerhouse, home to 600 million people. The 10 countries comprising the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, account for $2 trillion in GDP, just a tad smaller than India's, and as a region make up the third fastest growing economic bloc in the world. After China and India, so the top 3 fastest growing economic blocs are in Asia. By almost all measures, it can be said that this will be the Asian century. Other than dealing with the impact of pandemic to the business and acceleration of digital transformation, nothing should be more important for global chief executives than the emerging Asian nations, be it for talent and for markets. They need to get that right. As we move forward, for most of the countries of the world, one of the critical issues will be shortage of talent. Korn Ferry estimates that there will be talent shortage of more than 85 million people by 2030. This is due to the increasing demand for talent and decreasing populations across the world. This shortage of talent will result in $8.5 trillion in unrealized revenue. With the talent shortage will affect most countries. India is one of the very few countries which will be able to meet the talent needs, and this will allow it to outpace growth of the rest of the world. India will need to redouble efforts on good human capital development programs to maintain and benefit from this advantage. GCoEs should actively partner with government and NGOs to solve for the 3 stakeholders: their companies, their employees, and the country India. With growing economies, good consumption trends, massive digital transformation, and GCoE hubs, Asian countries will continue to be purchasers of technology, goods, and services. As Pari mentioned in his keynote on Monday, if someone still has doubts in their mind about Asia and particularly India's market potential, they should now look at what the recent investments in Geo by the top tech giants and also the top tech giants and also the private equity companies. Most of India's 1.3 billion people have access to world-class yet inexpensive digital infrastructure. This, along with government deregulation in manufacturing, focus on digital transformation, and support to startups, would result in massive productivity increase, resulting in economic growth and increasing discretionary spend. GCoEs have a significant role to play to ensure your companies can take advantage of this huge market opportunity over the next few years. There is one more kicker which will further accelerate the growth in Asia. Today, Asian companies are generally less profitable than Western companies, particularly the US companies. One of the reasons is the massive investment in low returning sectors like infrastructure. Whereas US has high percentage of capital invested in highly profitable sectors like technology, as more investments are made in technology companies like Jio, Tencent, Alibaba, and the unicorns in India, those profitability numbers will start changing. This will make it possible for even more capital available for future growth. So India and the rest of the Asian countries will provide major portions of future growth for the global companies. GCOs again should influence their companies to have a clear business strategy, just like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google have recently shown. How has Asia done this? What can the world learn from Asia? As Amita mentioned in the previous section, agility, anti-fragility, STEM education, frugality, digital first, scale, relationships, ambition, hard work, government and private public partnerships. These are some of the things which have made it possible for Asia to return to its glory days from 200 years ago. Now, talking about the COEs, we have recently worked on a research on global COE hotspots. We wanted to see where is the talent available for global companies to benefit from. And again, the Asian countries are again on the top. As a special for Zinnov Confluence, Amita is going to preview some of the findings over the next few slides. Amita, over to you.
Thank you, Nilesh. I would like to set the objective for our report. Some of the countries are across the globe that we look and study in this report are actually known to be good locations for software engineering talent. What we wanted to focus on, if you have to build centers of excellence, which basically means ability to build scalable and full software engineering teams while leveraging the ecosystem in those countries with ease of business and build teams in affordable cost. Which of the countries and how do they fare when we look at these four parameters in terms of ability to build centers of excellence? Well, we studied many countries. You see the 13 of them on the map here. We looked at countries closer to the big markets like US. So we looked at Canada, Latin countries like Mexico, Brazil. We looked at many Eastern European countries such as Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Czech, etc. We also looked at some Asian countries like India, China, and Philippines. Some countries like Ukraine were not studied on purpose because we see due to the recent geopolitical instability a couple of years ago, the interest in global companies in going to countries like Ukraine is declining. Well, let's look at the first chart here. If you were to compare on a macro view, the availability of software engineering talent, which is basically the size of the bubble that you see there, and the color of the bubble indicates the cost, red being very high cost. It's very evident. Countries like, of course, India and China have very, very huge pool of software engineering talent, more than 5 million. Other countries like Canada, Brazil, Mexico also have a big pool of software engineering talent. But if you see in terms of cost, countries like India, Brazil, Bulgaria, etc., provide relative cost benefits when you compare with countries like US and Canada. What we were interested in doing a practical analysis to see if a company wants to set up a 100-member full software engineering team comprising of junior, senior engineers, architects, DevOps people, quality assurance, etc., with the pyramid that you see in front of your screen there. And along with that, a product management team which comprises of product managers, owners, and UX UI designers. What would that cost them? How much of that talent would be easily available in these countries? And that's what we're going to show you in the next slide. So let's look at the cost first. If you were to set up a full 100-member team for your center of excellence, the cost of building the team or hiring the talent would look something like this. What we did was we compared it with US average. In US, it would take about 10.6 million to set up a team of 100 people, while you see other countries relatively provide a cost advantage. Of course, I don't think that's at the surprise finding. What is very important to see here, though, is that some countries provide a higher cost advantage than others. And these are countries like India, Philippines, Belarus, etc., while Eastern European countries are relatively more expensive than the countries I named, and Canada being even more relatively expensive. We also wanted to look at software engineering maturity, ecosystem maturity. It's very important. When companies come to set up centers of excellence, they would like to leverage the academia, the startups, and the service provider ecosystem. The way we did it is we looked at the top 1,000 R&D spenders, which we call the Zinnov 1,000 list, Z 1,000 list. We looked at the availability of tech startups in each of these countries, the revenue of the outsourcing service providers, and the availability of engineering schools in each of these countries. What you see on the chart here, the size of the bubble is again the size of the talent, but you see the countries have been segregated into nascent, evolving, and mature countries. Canada, China, India stand out to be the matured countries because of a very strong and mature ecosystem, while countries such as Romania, Czech Republic, Poland, Mexico, Bulgaria are evolving at a fast pace, and countries like Lithuania, Estonia, and Belarus have started picking up. We also ranked in our study overall ranking based on talent availability, the cost of hiring talent or setting up the offices there, ease of doing business, and the maturity of ecosystem. What we notice is the top 5 countries happen to be India, China, Canada, Poland, and Mexico. If you see more in depth on this chart, you see the ease of doing business is higher in Eastern European countries and Canada, while most of the Eastern European countries are part of European Union, and therefore their data privacy, IP security is higher than many other countries on this list. If you see from a talent availability, cost, and maturity of ecosystem point of view, countries like India, China, Canada, etc. stand out. Countries like China sometimes struggle because there is only 10% of English speaking population in the talent pool, but they still have done really well in terms of the ecosystem they have developed. We have done in-depth study on each of these countries. This is a 200-page report. If you're interested in knowing more about this report, please get in touch with us at events@zinnov.com. And I would like to welcome back Nilesh to thank our contributors for this study and this report.
Thanks, Amita. So we want to really thank our colleagues Tanvi Singhal, Ankit Mishra, Pranav Anand, Adar Agrawal, and Nachiket Mahajan, who worked on this report and on this research for this Asia deck. Uh, Thank you, Amita, and looking forward to seeing you all in the future at the next live conference.